Okay, so Shavua Tov and Boker Tov, and after the break for the Miluim, I'm happy, very happy, to be here again. Our shiur this year on Sundays is dedicated Leilui Nishmat Rafael Moshe Ben Eliyahu Russell Mark Unter Slack, and our shiur today will discuss a person, a rabbi, great rabbi, that is out of the mold, we may say, of the usual rabbis we speak here about. That's out of the box. And that is, we can say, he's twice removed. Now, I'm speaking to the people sitting here around the table and the people that I see on Zoom. Obviously, after that, we upload it to YouTube, and I don't know who is looking. But the people, at least sitting here around the table, I don't see any Yemenite Jews sitting here. So Yemenite Jews were a closed community for a very long time. They traced themselves to the time before the destruction of the first temple. Before the destruction of the first temple, they were already in Yemen. And while they were in contact with other Jewish communities, it's not like Ethiopian Jews that were completely out of sync. They were in some contact, and the Sopharim of the Rambam, for example, did reach them, and the Shulchan Aruch later. But nonetheless, they were very much to themselves. If I would ask people here, I guess, to name three main Ashkenazic rabbis in the last 1,000 years, I think everyone here would be able to name three Ashkenazic rabbis. Also Sephardic rabbis, three, the last 1,000, I think that people would be able to name. If I would ask you to name three Yemenite rabbis from the last 1,000 years, I'm not sure how many of us would be able to come with three names. And that is not because they didn't have rabbis, but because, again, there was a great separation between the Yemenite community and the other Jewish communities. So that is one reason why that is out of our usual box of rabbis, we may say. The second is that here we speak not about a posek. I hope that in the next, month or 2 months, we will speak also about the Maharitz Salah, another Yemenite, very important rabbi, who was a posek. But here we speak about Rabbi Shalom Mizrachi Sharabi, Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, who was not a posek, who was a mekubal. And again, looking, I don't know who would watch or listen to this shiur later, but looking around this table, the number of mekubalim, at least that I know about, sitting here around, is not great. So as I said, that is twice removed from our usual path. Nonetheless, he is a very important person in the development, we may say, and the decimation of Kabbalah, and is extremely influential to this day. And also, that's an interesting, I think, opening to really a different community than what we really are used to speak about. So some background about Yemenite Jewish community in the 18th century, because we speak about the 18th century. Rabbi Shalom Sharabi was born in 1720. So that's almost a little more than 200 years ago. And in the 18th century, the situation in the first half of the 18th century, 300, excuse me. Yeah, okay. Time passes when you enjoy. 300, thank you so much. So in the first half of the 18th century, the situation of Yemenite Jews was bad. And the reason is because of the 17th century. And that is, in Yemen, there were wars between the local Yemenite warlords, you may say. You can see them to this day, by the way, in Yemen. So there were local tribes, local warlords, and they were fighting both against the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, that was trying to control them, and from time to time they were successful in invading and conquering Yemen, and sometimes the Yemenites were successful in rejecting and throwing them away. And again, that's a story that, if you follow the news, I don't know how much you are interested in what is going on in Yemen, but if you are following the news, that is a very old story what is happening right now. It didn't begin with Iran and Saudi Arabia or whatever the foreign forces that right now are influential there, but that's a very, very, very old story. And so that was one thing. They were fighting against the Turks, and they were fighting among themselves, as happened also right now. And the outcome, as always, when there is a war, is that the Jews are always on the losing side. Regardless of who is losing, the Jews would be on the losing side. And that was also what happening then. They were blamed by both sides being not loyal. And so there were different bans and decrees against them. Some of them were just harassing, such as they were not, from a certain point, they were not allowed to have they had their traditional clothes and they had a traditional head cover. So they were not allowed to walk with that, which was very harmful to their sense of tradition, of Mesorah. Because maybe I should have said it earlier, that Yemenite Jews, to a large extent, they are the community that most preserved all traditions from the past. They were very proud in their traditions. So, for example, many consider, as always, the judgment is open, but many consider the pronunciation of Hebrew by Yemenite Jews to be the closest to the original in the time of the second or the first temple. So they preserved it the best. That's because they were very keen on Tanakh, they were very keen on Ivrit, they were very keen on preserving their traditions. And for them, to ban them from being able to wear their traditional clothes was extremely harmful, but that was only harassing. In 1679, there was a decree of exile on all Yemenite Jews, and they were given the opportunity either to accept Islam or to be exiled. Some of them surrendered and accepted Islam. And the most were exiled to a place which I obviously will not be able to pronounce, but it's called Mavaza, and that is a certain desert in Yemen. It's a salt desert, a very harsh place. They were there, the whole of Yemenite Jews were all crowded into this desert for 2.5 years. Now, they speak, the numbers I saw, that more than half of Yemenite Jews was lost during this period. Now, it's very difficult to get reliable numbers, but even if it's not half, even if it's a third, we speak about an Holocaust and a very severe decree. And they didn't forget it. It's part of their history. So when they were given the permission to return to their homes, they discovered that their neighbors have taken control of all of the homes. All of the shoes were destroyed. The books, the manuscripts that they were keeping, there was no print in Yemen. So everything was in manuscripts, even in the 17th century. The very rare and expensive manuscripts were destroyed. And so that was very devastating. It was very devastating. And that was coupled with a lack of strong leadership. So for the first half of the 18th century, there was a certain a rabbi, his name just slipped me, but a very, very famous one. I'm sorry, but he was known as a poet also, and he was the leader. He got to the age of 101, and when he passed away, there was a very big hole in the leadership. So that was the situation. So many had converted, many were dead, the shoes were destroyed, communities were devastated, and learning was disrupted because of the lack of manuscripts. And this is the situation in the first half of the 18th century when Rabbi Shalom Sharabi is born in a place called Shar'eb. As you can understand, the name Sharabi comes from the place Shar'eb. Okay, so he's born there. Now, we know very little about his youth, very little. We know that he became orphan in a very young age, and he was supporting his brothers, maybe he had a sister, and he was supporting them. He was a salesman. He was a peddler, I think that was the name, right? A peddler. So he would walk from one house to the other, both Jews and non-Jews, and he will sell ceramic pots and small things. That's how we made, as you can understand, a very meager living. So the story goes that he once went in Czan'ā, which was the great city, again to this day, in Yemen, and also a very big Jewish community. So he was walking there, peddling, selling from door to door, and he was tall, dark, and handsome. He was a nice guy. And he was knocking on one of the doors of a non-Jewish family, and there was a woman there, and she opens the door and she says, you know, your merchandise, it's very interesting to me. Please come to my home and let's see what you have got. And he says, okay, obviously he wants to make the sale. So he goes in, and then she closed the door behind him, and she wants them to be together. Now, the story goes, and again, now that's an introduction to the whole CS. As you can understand, as I say in the beginning of every shiur, what we have are mostly stories, especially when we speak about Yemen, from which we do not have any ordinary history books that survived. So everything is stories, but even if the story is not 100% accurate, as we say every time, they do not tell the stories about me. So that means that the stories do reflect something about the personalities that we are learning about. So she is offering him whatever she offers. And he says, okay, I just need to go to the washroom before to prepare myself. And she says, fine. And he goes to the washroom. He leaves everything that he sells. He cannot obviously take himself to the washroom, so he leaves it there, and he jumps through the window outside, and he runs away. Now he understands that he lost all of his money. Whatever he had, which was not much, now he had lost. And obviously she is not going to let that pass. Just remember the Yosef story. And then he decides that he is going to leave Yemen, because there is nothing more to him in Yemen. And it is not clear, did he already make his mind to go to Eretz Israel, or did he just wanted to leave and begin to wander? As I said, there is no hard fact. He didn't write a biography that we can learn from. So everything is stories. But he left, we know that he left Yemen earlier than the age of 20. That's what we can say. It's difficult to believe it was in the age of 13. So we can say that it was around the age of 15, 16, 17, 18, something in that range. So he leaves, not married. For a Yemenite Jew, but not being married in the age of 18, he's old. So he's leaving Yemen and he's beginning to wander. Now, the next stop that he surfaces in, again, I don't know what is the path that he took, but we meet him again in a story by the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai is the famous Rabbi Yosef Chaim, and he lived in the 19th century. So that is 100 years after the life of Rabbi Shalom Sharabi. But he has a story that went in tradition in Baghdad. And the story goes, that's in the source bet in front of you, סיפרו לנו אבותינו על רבינו הרשש זכר צדיק וקדוש לברכה. So our forefathers told us about Rabbi Shalom Sharabi. Rashash, that's acronym for Rabbi Shalom Sharabi. כשיצא מארץ תימן, when he went out of Yemen, בא דרך בומביי. So it's interesting. The path he took was through India. So from Yemen to Bombay, which seems to be counterintuitive, but I guess that was just the trade routes you had to take. So he went through Bombay, and then to Basra, and then to Baghdad. כעובר אורח, so he came as a guest. כדי ללך לעיר הקודש ירושלים דרך דמשק. So in order to reach ירושלים through Damascus. וזה היה בזמן הזקן הנכבד ירא אלוקים, הרב רבי חיים נשמתו עדן, אביו של הרב הגאון, מור זקני רבינו משה, זכרו לברכה לכולם. He says, it was in the time of my great grandfather. So 100 years before him. וכאשר ברבינו הרשש זצוקל, מתעלם שלא הודיע עצמו שהוא חכם, אלא בסוג אדם פשוט, גר עובר אורח. So he says, he came in hiding. He didn't show himself to be a great sage as he was, but he looked like just a simple man. And we would see that that is a recurring theme regarding Rabbi Shalom Sharabi. He was very humble. He always was on a disguise of just a simple man. ונתעכב פה, so he had to wait in Baghdad, עד שנזדמנה שיירה שהולכת לדמשק. So he had to wait till there would be a caravan going to Damascus. ובזמן ישיבתו פה העיר, and while he was waiting in the city, היה הולך ביום בישיבה של שייך יצחק גאון ז"ל. שייך is obviously the Arabic name, right, for Reb. In Ashkenaz, you say Reb Yitzchak. So in Baghdad, it's Sheikh Yitzchak, but it's the same thing. So there was a certain Rabbi Yitzchak there, a certain Sheikh Yitzchak there, not necessarily a big scholar. So we have to understand, in Baghdad, in many places, they would have a yeshiva. Now, yeshiva would not necessarily mean that they would really learn. What they would do there is what we call ligros, that is to chant, I guess, in English. So they would sit, usually with Zohar or something of that, meaning something in Kabbalah, and they would not be young people, they would be old, retired people. So what would they do the whole day? They would go to this yeshiva, they would have a nice breakfast, and then they would sit, and they would just read, not understanding a word usually, from the Zohar. So that would be their morning, and then they would get a nice meal for noon, and then they would go home at 3, 4 o'clock, and they would call in the day. So that's the way that that's better than, I guess, than playing backgammon, right? So that was the way that they were. So he would go with them and just sit there and learn Zohar. And so that's the story they tell. Excuse me. No. Yeah. And והיו לומדים שם זקנים בספר הזוהר בכל יום, ולוקחים הספקה מן כל היסוד. The old people would sit there and learn Zohar, and they would be given food, הספקה, from the charity. והלך וישב, זה would be like מועדון הקשיש here in תלמון, it's a nice place. והלך וישב ללמוד זוהר הקדוש עמהם, so he sat there and learned זוהר הקדוש, till there was a שיירה, a caravan, and then he went to Damascus. Okay, fine. ואומרים, שכשהיה לומד זוהר שם, so one day he was sitting there, and they would learn the זוהר. הנה יום אחד היה לומד בזוהר פרשת בלק. So they would sit with the זוהר of פרשת בלק. And he would read. ויאמר, that's from the זוהר, the way the זוהר is built, is like a midrash. They bring pasuk from the Torah, and then they explain the pasuk according to the mystical reading. So that's the way that the Zohar is built. ויאמר שוב אל בלק וכה תדבר. So that's a pasuk from Parshat Balak, in which you remember that Bilam wanted to curse the Jewish people, and God says to him, no, you'd go to Balak, that's the king that hired him to curse the Jewish people, but you wouldn't say what you want to say. כה תדבר, that is what you're going to say. כה means that. Now the Zohar has a whole treatise about what does the word כה means. The כה is 25, that is like the gematria of the name of God. So that's the whole thing about what is כה. What is כה? And Rabbi Shalom Sharabi sits there and he reads this midrash of the Zohar. והיה רבינו לומד בזוהר ובהתלהבות ובקול רם. So you would read this passage. Now remember, everyone would read a passage from the Zohar, right? Going by turns. And he is reading this passage and he begins to בהתלהבות. So to fire himself up. And he reads that בקול רם, in loud voice. וכשהיה אומר תיבת כה, and when you say the word כה, באותם הדברים, in this passage, היה מוציא תיבת כה מפיו בחוזק ותוקף ליבו. So he began to shout there, and to as I said, to fire himself up. And, you know, the old people sit there and they just read the Zohar. So what is going on? This guy, you know, is completely over the line. ויאמרו לו הזקנים היושבים שם, מדוע אתה צועק בתיבו? Why did you begin to shout? Is everything fine with you? ויאמר להם בלשון ערבי של תימן. And he spoke to them in Yemenite Arabic. You know that Arabic is different between Yemen and Iraq. So it's not exactly the same pronunciation of words. So he was not speaking the local dialect, right? He was speaking the dialect of Yemen. And he told them, Hada al ko ma'aka bakallabi. So that means, I hope that I read it more or less correct, but what it means, even you cannot, I guess that you cannot judge, but what it means is, it sounds good. Hada al ko, hada means this. So this ko, this word ko, ma'aka. The ma'aka is burns. Bakallabi, labi. You heard the Hebrew word libi, my heart. So he told them, this word ko burns my heart. So that's why I am shouting it. Ko, Tomar. Ko. And he was completely engulfed in this learning of the Zohar. So everything, they were just chanting. But he was learning. He was not only learning. He was penetrating into the secrets of the Zohar. עד כאן שמענו מאבותינו. So it says the Ben Ish Chai, that's what we heard from our forefathers about the time in which the Rashash spent in Baghdad. So he says this righteous person, before his son went up in Yerushalayim, was in our land in Baghdad, אך לא נודע כבודו לאנשי עירנו. But we did not merit to recognize his greatness. So it was lost on us. You need to be tuned when someone comes in. And that, again, that would be part of what we are going, that would be a recurring theme with Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, that greatness does not always look as greatness. Sometimes it's been disguised as something that is very simple, something even vulgar. And you need to be attuned, you need to be humble in order to be able to recognize greatness when you see it. Because if you are not humble, if you think you know what greatness is, then you are going to pass by real greatness. So that's one of the great lessons that Rabbi Shalom Sharabi is teaching us. Okay, so he was in Baghdad and he continues to Damascus. Again, I don't know about his stay in Damascus. And the next time, again, he surfaces. There are different stories about the journeys, but I'm leaving them aside right now because I want to continue with his life story. And he surfaces again in Yerushalayim. And he comes to Yerushalayim. He's still very young, so in his 20s. And he goes to a certain yeshiva of Mekubalim in Yerushalayim that was called Beit El. The yeshiva, now again, we have to forget what we know about regular yeshivot. That is not a yeshiva of 19-year-old guys sitting there and learning and discussing. When we speak about yeshivat Mekubalim, that can be 10 or 12 or 20 people. That would be a very big yeshivat Mekubalim. All right, so 10 to 20 people. Usually they are above 40, not 20, above 40. So they are very serious and respected people. And most of their day is not in learning. Most of their day is in tefillah. Because for Mekubalim, one of their most important activities is the kavanot. So the kavanot, it's intentions, but you cannot really translate this word because it's a term. It's a technical Kabbalistic term, kavanot in tefillah, which means that for Mekubalim, and the Rashash would be one of the great stars of kavanot, if we may say so. Kavanot means that you take a word in the tefillah and you almost take it out of its context and you analyze it as standing to itself. What does it mean? To what part of the divine presence does it refer to? So we have Shechina, we have Tiferet, we have different parts. And again, not chas v'chayil different parts of God. God is one. And so you cannot speak about different parts of God, chas v'chayil. That is other religions. But the way that God is revealed to us, because we are not one, so we see things in a multifaceted way, then also the revelation of God to us can look as different facets, as different types of revelation. So sometimes God would look like a man of war, right? On Yam Suf, ke'ish milchama, you see him like a man of war. In Beit HaMikdash, he is a man of peace. So the way that God reveals him, while God is one, the way he reveals himself to us is through different revelations. So the Mekubalim, and I would expand on it in a few minutes, but the Mekubalim, it's very important for them to, in the tefillah, to direct their tefillah to the proper type of revelation. And that takes a lot of time. Again, if some of you would look at the Sidur of Mekubalim, these are huge things, and they stand with it, and they can daven shachrit for 3, 4, 5 hours. Because every word, you need to look at the intentions and to understand exactly where do you stand in this map of divine revelations. Now, I know that you didn't completely understand, but that's good because your teacher also didn't completely understand. We speak about things that are beyond our level. We just try to get some very basic understanding. Okay, so he's coming there. And as I said, they daven most of the day, but they also learn in order to better understand the structure of the divine presence, the Shechina, what we call in Hebrew, the Shechina in the world. Fine. Now, again, he comes there, and he comes to the Rosh Yeshiva of Beit El, and he was also the founder of the yeshiva, was Rabbi Gedalia Chayun. Rabbi Gedalia Chayun. So he was a great Mekubal and a very important person, very important rabbi. And he founded the yeshiva. And Rabbi Shalom Sharabi comes in, again, he's a 20-something years old guy, much younger than the other students in the yeshiva. So he's not even trying to be a student. He comes in, he says, you know, I would like to be in the presence of people that are holy. I don't know to learn, I don't know anything, I don't know Kabbalah. I would like to be the Meshamesh. So that's like the helper. All right, so I would bring tea, I would bring coffee. By the way, much of the work of Mekubalim is being done at night. They wake up at midnight and they say Tikkun Chatzot, it's called, and they learn by night. So a lot of coffee. It's very interesting. Almost in all of the stories of Kabbalah, coffee is it's very interesting. Anyhow. Yeah, it's very interesting. So I would give the coffee, I would give tea, I would clean the place, I would make sure that there is oil in the lanterns, in the lamps. Okay, fine. And Rabbi Gedalia Chayun, and everything I asked for is a place to sleep and some food. Rabbi Gedalia Chayun in the beginning, he doesn't want necessarily that Shalom Sharabi would be, but he say I'm an orphan. Okay, fine. He comes in. And for a few years, he is the shamash. So that's what he does. He brings tea, he brings coffee, he lights the lamps, he orders he puts in order the chairs. Beautiful. And now that's a classic story. Again, is it a true story? I don't know, but it's a beautiful story. So one day, the Mekubalim sit there and they have a question in Kabbalah. And even the master, Rabbi Gedalia Chayun, cannot give an answer. There is a contradiction in the writings of the Kadosh of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and they cannot give an answer to the contradiction. They cannot understand. And in the end, time for supper comes. They say, okay, Tishbi etaretz kushiyot v'she'elot. Eliyahu would answer our difficulties. Let's go and have supper. And they close the books and they go. And Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, who all this time, he was bringing coffee, he was bringing tea. His ear was always on the Mekubalim to hear what they say. And he was learning. He was himself. It seems that he was already a scholar when he came there, but he learned a lot during these years. And they didn't even recognize it. He was just lazy, sitting there. And he comes in, and while they are in supper, he sits on the place of the Rosh Yeshiva. and he writes the answer on the shulaim, on the margin, thank you, of the sefer, of the book of Etz HaChaim. Etz HaChaim is the book that was written by Rabbi Chaim Vital. Rabbi Chaim Vital was the student, the disciple of the Ari HaKadosh. And almost all that we know from the Ari HaKadosh comes through Rabbi Chaim Vital. The Ari HaKadosh wrote almost nothing, and all the writings are from the writings of Rabbi Chaim Vital. And he writes the answer to the question. And then he goes away. And they return the next day, and they sit, and the Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Gedaliah Chayun, opens the sefer. And what do you know? Eliyahu Hanavi wrote the tshuva on the sefer. And Rabbi Gedaliah Chayun is obviously, his mind is blown. Eliyahu Hanavi came, he's sure. Beautiful. And the answer is beautiful, and everyone is happy. And the same day he comes home, and he tells he has a daughter named Hannah. And he says to her, you know, a beautiful thing had happened. We had a question in the yeshiva. No one could solve it. And we went to eat supper. And while we ate supper, Eliyahu Hanavi came in and wrote the answer on my book. Hannah looks at him, and she is the cleaner of the Beit Midrash. She says, Abba, I have to tell you something. What? It's not Eliyahu Hanavi. What do you mean it's not Eliyahu? Who could have answered such a question? No one in our yeshiva could have answered it. Who could answer? It's Shalom, the Shamash. I was cleaning. He didn't see me. He was sitting on your place, and he was writing the tshuva. And obviously, Rabbi Gedaliah Chayun it's almost stranger than having Eliyahu Hanavi. Having Eliyahu Hanavi in yeshiva mekubalim, that's nothing out of the ordinary. But having the Shamash writing a tshuva, that's very unusual. So he goes in the next day, and he invites the Shamash, this young Yemenite guy, Shalom. He invites him to his office. And Shalom comes to the office. The name of the poet was Rabbi Shalom Shavazi. Excuse me. Okay. That's you remember that we spoke about the guy that died in the... Okay, thank you. Returning to our story. So he invites him to his office, and he is asking him, Shalom, what do you know about Kabbalah? And Shalom says, I know to give coffee, I know to give tea, I know to clean the place. Did you write the answer in my book yesterday? And Shalom Shavazi says, I don't know what you're speaking about. And then Rabbi Gedaliah Chayun says, I am being mashbiya. I swear you, that's the name, in the holy name, that you'd answer me. Did you write this answer or not? And Rabbi Shalom Shavazi begins to cry. And he begs him. He was, I only want to be a simple shamash. I don't want to become a rabbi. I don't. And Rabbi Gedaliah Chayun says, no. You had your ears as a simple man, but now you must reveal yourself to the world because you have what to deliver. God gave you these powers, not in order to be a shamash. And then, according to the story, it takes off. Now, the Mekubalim in Yerushalayim, maybe some of you have seen, they always walk with white clothes. Some of them only on Shabbat, but the Rabbanim, they walk with white clothes the whole day. Because white in Kabbalah has to do with purity. That's why also the bride goes with white. So he takes off his white, he had a white cloak, long cloak. He takes it off. They have a white, like a streimel. He takes off this white hat, and he put it on the young Yemenite, Shalom Sharabi, and says, from now on, you are the Rosh Yeshiva. Obviously, Rabbi Shalom Sharabi is from being a nobody, a shamash, is becoming the Rosh Yeshiva. He says, no, you would continue to be the Rosh Yeshiva. And the deal they reach in the end is that Shalom Sharabi would marry Hannah, the daughter of Rabbi Gedaliah Chayun, and he became like a co-Rosh Yeshiva. And after the death of Rabbi Gedaliah Chayun, Rabbi Shalom Sharabi became the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Beit El. So that's basically the story of Rabbi Shalom Sharabi. We have another small story from him before we go to speak about his work and his Torah. Another small story. Again, I myself, in the little research I did, saw a few versions of the story. So when you see so many versions, without investigating too much, so it's somewhat. I mean, the story I just told, it seems that it happened. There are many very good sources that corroborate the story that I just told, but the story that I'm going to tell, that's more suspected. Anyhow, the story goes by that Hannah Chayun, right, the daughter of Gedalia Chayun, gave birth to a boy, Yitzchak Sharabi. By the way, he became the Rosh Yeshiva of Beit El after the death of Rabbi Shalom Sharabi. But after giving birth to this to the boy, she died in a young age, as unfortunately was very common back then. Nowadays, women have longer longevity than men, because I guess they drive more safely. But more responsible. What can we do? But back then, because of the dangers that have to do and risk and hazards, mostly that has to do with childbearing. Women died much younger than men. So his wife died, his first wife died. And in a very surprising move, this man that was now the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Beit El, is very important rabbi and a very holy Mekubal, now not very much known as a holy man. He married a very, very simple woman that was the helper in the new cleaning lady in the yeshiva. So everyone was very surprised. And the mystery was resolved when the second wife died, also unfortunately while he was still alive. And they were trying to take the bed with the body to the Beit HaKvarot, to the cemetery. And it was extremely heavy. They couldn't carry her. And then Rabbi Shalom Sharabi was already an old man. He told them, I will tell you what the story is. And he showed them a little note, a very old note. And he told them, after the death of my first wife, so this woman was just a simple helper. She would give him the tea and the coffee while he was sitting and learning. And one day she bought him 2 cups. And he asked her, why do you bring me 2 cups? I'm only by myself. She said, no, there is a man next to you. Seems a very respectful man. So I brought 2 cups. Now he was amazed, because the man sitting next to him was Eliyahu Hanavi. And no one was able to see him learning with Eliyahu Hanavi. And suddenly this simple woman was able to see Eliyahu Hanavi, and she brought 2 cups of coffee. So he told her, you must take an oath that you would not tell anyone that you are seeing someone sitting next to me. And the woman said, I'm agreeing to do so, but I have a condition, on one condition. What is the condition? That I will be with you in Olam Haba, in the next world. And when Rabbi Shalom Sharabi heard that, he said, you are so pure, that is your condition. And that you were able to see Eliyahu Hanavi, I also want to be with you in this world. So he married her. And that's again goes, as I said, that's the whole story for Rabbi Shalom Sharabi is a story about being able to see behind the clothes, behind what seems to us many times as simple, as vulgar, as someone that is maybe is not knowledgeable. The world is not what we see in first glance. Maybe that is like the first step in Kabbalah, in mysticism, in maybe in faith in general. What is the first step in faith? What is it to have faith? I don't need to have faith in order to know that the table is here. Having faith means to believe that there is a meaning behind, beyond, beneath, or above what we usually see. And mysticism or Kabbalah is not only believing, but having a more structured, maybe, belief in what is beyond and above and behind. And that is the story of Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, to a large extent. And the note was a note in which he wrote to her his commitment that she would be him to the next world. And until he put the note on the bed, they could not carry the bed to the grave.
Was that why it was so heavy?
Yeah, that is why it was so heavy. It stopped them from being able to carry the bed. So that's, now again, the story is beautiful. What do we need more than that? So that's the story of his second of his second wife. He himself died in a very young age. He died in 1777. So if he was born in 1720, that put him 57. We know with the date, Yud Shvat. As always, it's much easier. I forgot about it a few times. It's much easier to know the passing dates of great people than knowing the birth date, because the birthday they were not great yet. But in the death, we know. So he died in Yud Shvat. By the way, people go to this day in the Yortzeit. They call it the Hilula. That's the Sephardic word. So they go to the Hilula in Yud Shvat. They go to his grave. And they said there are great miracles. And two people coming to his grave on Yud Shvat. I didn't have the chance yet to do so. What was his work? What was his Torah? Excuse me? In Har Zeitim. What was his Torah? So his Torah was, his main work is Sidur HaRashash. Sidur HaRashash. Sidur HaRashash, Sidur, as you can understand, Rashash is his name. And what is really is the kavanot of the Ari. So he took the whole work of the Ari. Now the Ari did not write kavanot to the tefillah. The Ari wrote the structure of the inner world as he saw it. Now again, meaning to say, how does God reveal himself in the world? How creation began, right? How there is a place. There are very interesting philosophical questions that Kabbalah gives them certain answers. So for example, how can there be a world if God is everywhere? So how there can be a place to the world? Now, again, this question is not a question of geography. God is not geographical everywhere. He is not a body. It's a question of existence. It's an existential question. If God is everything, is so powerful, how there can be a place, an existential place, to an individual entity, mind, that sees itself as separate from God? That's one of the main questions that the Ari Zal was dealing with. And the answer is, now I'm giving you 101, right, of very, very, very basic Kabbalah. And the answer is the secret of the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum means in Hebrew, how would you say tzimtzum? Like zipping? Shrinking. So all of these words, we have to understand, all of these words are only a mashal, only a pop. They are not real. They just are aids to our understanding. So God shrank himself, as it was, tzimtzem atzmo, in order to give place to the world. But then there was another problem. If God is not here, how can anything be here? Right? Because God is the source of everything. So in order for the world to become, there is a need for a very certain thing to happen. God should be here, but in a mask. So by being masked, there is a place for us. By being, there is a possibility of us existing. That is the very basic nature of the world. So the whole world are masked revelations of God. All right? Because if there would be no God, there would be nothing. If God would be completely revealed, there would again be nothing but God. So you need to have God hidden. So everything in this world, everything that we see, is different types of hide places, we may say, or different ways of God to disguise himself. So that's the basic premise, right? That's the basic premise. Now, again, it goes much deeper and much beyond what I just said, because in Kabbalah, they explain to you what are the different disguises that God can take, which are what we call the Sefirot. So these are the different ways by which God reveals himself. And they have a very complex and complicated interrelationship between them of how they affect each other. So it's extremely, extremely complicated. What you do in the tefillah, you are trying to reunite, to reveal God that is hidden in everything in the world. Now, part of what is happening in the world is the exile. Right? The Jewish people are in exile. It's not only us that are in exile. when we are in exile, that's part of the nature of the world as it is now. It means that the divine presence itself is in exile. The Shekhinah is in exile, meaning that God cannot reveal himself the way he wants to reveal himself, because the world is not prepared. If God would reveal himself right now, the world would collapse. It's not holy enough, in very simple language, to contain the seeing of God. So part of the word of Kabbalah is revealing God in the world, holying the world. Where can we say that? All right? In order for us to be able to accept the face of Hashem, the face of God. Now, again, all of these words, I guess that I hope that we all understand, all of these words are not real. There is no face to God. It does not really reveal it. Meaning the whole thing is a mashal. It's a picture. But it's a picture that is supposed to correspond to something that is very, very real, but cannot be contained in human language, cannot be seen in human imagination, and cannot be understood by human mind. So that is the work of the kavanot of the Rashash. It's trying to put in, when I am saying just Refaenu, right? So I ask God to heal us. I am a very simple man. So when I speak about Refaenu, I mean that I have a problem, or my friend have a problem, or someone of my family have a problem, and I want the Kadosh Baruch Hu to help me with the, to help him or to help her with the problem. So very simple. But for a Mekubal, when he says Refaenu, he says something much, 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 much deeper. He says, I mean, again, I do not even pretend to know, but just as just to throw us to some, so that would be the wound of the world. The Shekhinah itself is wounded. And when we speak about the Shekhinah, so what part of the Shekhinah, not again, parts is not a good word. What aspect revealed to us is injured? So Malchut, for example, kingship is injured. Why? Because the kingship of God is not seen right now in the world. Right? The kingship of God is hidden, so it's wounded. So in Refaenu, maybe again, I'm throwing something. It's much more complicated than that. But so you intend yourself to Refaenu, but then Hashem, Yud Kei Refaenu Hashem. Why it's Hashem and not Elokim? So the word Hashem means something. So again, and then you'd have the specific intentions for the word Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and so on and so forth. So if some of you would go to the store and try to buy, I don't know if they would sell, but try to buy the Sidur HaRashash, you would see it's a huge, humongous thing. And it has diagrams of the difference, and every word, sometimes there is a word in a page, in order to have all of the needed intentions, kavanot. Now, this work is used to this very day. By now again, I'm repeating what I heard, but it seems that most of the Mekubalim to this day are using this Sidur. They even have Kitzur Sidur HaRashash, because it's so long and heavy. If not everyone can do every day the whole thing, so they have a Kitzur of the Kavanot of the Rashash. So it's an extremely influential work. Now for us, again, it's much, much beyond. Again, at least for me, maybe some of you, I don't know. As I said, part of the lesson here is that there are disguises in this world. So maybe there are people here that can give this shiur instead of me and give and explain. But I guess that for most of us, that is very much beyond our fetch. But there is something to be learned here. And there is the land, as we said, there's a lesson, as we said, which is that things are not always as they seem. A very important lesson. And B is what the Mekubalim do by something like the Kavanot HaRashash. They go up and they say, our work or our tefillah is not only for our own sake, it's also for heaven's sake. Because the divine itself, out of his own choice, obviously, but the divine itself is damaged, is injured, is lacking. Now that sounds almost right heretical, but that's the way God decided to create this world. Maybe there was no other way. And our work here in this world is also as it is. Now, again, we have to be very careful with what I say now, because it should not be taken literally in any sense. I don't know how it should be taken. I hope that it's been taken in some level. But our work here is also to help God. Because God cannot, in the way that he created the world, he cannot, under the rules that he himself set, he cannot reveal himself without our help. And when we cry for exile, we should not only cry for the problems of our nation. The problems of the Jewish people are a reflection of the separation in the divine words. That's how the Mekubalim, and that's the Rashash is part of this tradition, a very important part of the tradition. That's the way they see the world, that's the way they see our own work in this world. I would finish with something very important the Rashash did, and that is he did not only wrote this Siddur, and he wrote another books in Kabbalah, he also created a society, a club. It was called Chevrat Ahava Veshalom, the Society of Love and Peace. There were 12 members in the society, and what they had, I skip now to the last source, go to source 6. כולנו 12 כמספר שבטי כה. So they had 12 members in this society, because there were 12 tribes. נהיה אוהבים כולנו זה לזה, אהבה רבה, אהבת נפש ואהבת הגוף. He says we must love each other. אהבה ושלום. We must love each other in body and soul. והכל לעשות נחת רוח ליוצרנו בדביקו דרוח חדה, אך בחלקות לעניין הגשם בלבד. He says our bodies are separated, but we combine our souls. ונהיה כולנו כנפש אחת, we one spirit, רבת תפארת, etc., etc. So he says, part of bringing the redemption, as I said, our problem in this world is the problem of separation, that things look one way, but really they are something else. It looks like that's only a table, like it's a room, there are 4 walls. In truth, it's a shul. Right? Now the separation, we can look at this room and we do not see a Bet Knesset. In order to see that, we have to walk in order to see a holy place. That's the separation between the truth, the holiness of that's the simple truth is the holiness of this place that we right now sit in. And what we see, the 4 walls, that's a disguise. So this separation is what we have to reunite. When we do mitzvot, we reveal God in this world. When we daven, we reveal God in this world. When we see ourselves as one entity, the Jewish people, we begin with our friends, but obviously that should expand the 12 tribes. When we see the Jewish people as one entity, then we reveal God in this world. And that was a very important thing that the Rashash contributed into our understanding of redemption. Redemption is not only about returning to the land. Redemption is not only about being holier. It's not only about doing more mitzvot or tchiyat hametim or being Bet HaMikdash. Redemption is also about understanding that in some very basic, fundamental way, in a very early source, a very early root, we are all part of one thing. And understanding that is re-bringing God into the world. So that's another second lesson, I think, very important of the Rashash. So we learned today, again, about someone who is usually out of the usual mold of the rabbis we are learning about, but I do think that there are great lessons that even us, not Mekubalim, can learn from this very holy man. Thank you very much. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Wasn't the story of another thing was so much?
Thank